Hi there, this is Rachel Stone introducing Transformational Leadership. All elements of leadership, but especially transformational leadership, which includes learning to be a coach while you're a leader. All coaches are leaders, but not all leaders are coaches. And my mission is to help solve that. I hope you enjoy.
Thank you very much indeed for joining me, David. You're a serial entrepreneur and you've been an expert in the franchising world for over 20 years. Could you tell us what it is that you've done and how you've helped so many other businesses to get the system driving the business?
After my last business, which was a digital agency, where I got trapped into the day-to-day operations for probably about the better part of 10 years before I really stepped out of it, systemized it, and got a leadership team in place to really run it. So going through that process is when I realized, hey, I'm onto something here. I've got a little bit of a process, and I'd fallen out of love with my previous business, the digital agency. And when I stepped away from the business, I thought, what do I really want to do? And that's when I rediscovered my passion for systems and processes and sharing that with other business owners. So that's what I stepped into and captured and developed a method called systemology, a process of taking someone from not having any systems or a systems culture in place to a point where the business runs smoothly, it's systems driven, and the team reaches a point where they just say, hey, this is how we do things here.
I think you've been quite modest there because you've spent quite a bit of time working with the fantastic Michael Gerber and in his work, The E-Myth, which all very successful business owners will be familiar with. And if anybody out there has not actually read that book and hasn't read David's book, then please do get on board with driving your business through systems. So tell us a little bit about that as well, because that must have been so powerful for you.
Yeah, it was a fantastic moment in time for me. It was just towards the end of that digital agency, and I was thinking about what I was going to work on next. I had a completely fortuitous series of events that led me to Michael Gerber, and his wife reached out to me and asked me if I could work on a project with him, which I was only too happy to. Fortunately, at that point, I'd got my business to the point where I was able to step away from it. So I took 3 months out and really devoted some time into helping Michael launch the last book in his E-Myth series called Beyond the E-Myth. And it was just a great opportunity to work quite closely with him. Obviously, his work had already very heavily influenced mine and the way that I think about business and run business. And it was just a little bit of a magical dream experience where I got to work with him and learned a lot of valuable lessons going through that process around what does it take to build a business that really touches the lives and hearts of business owners around the world. And I took a lot of that and rolled it into systemology. In many ways, see systemology as the how-to guide for the E-Myth. I think the E-Myth talks a lot about why systems are important and gets a lot of that foundation in place, helps business owners find their dream, vision, purpose, and mission. That's a big part of Michael's work. A lot of business owners, and where I had felt like I got stuck for a little while, was that how do I do it? Where do I start? What are the first few systems I document? Where do I store that? How do I get the team on board? All those types of questions I didn't feel I had the answer to when I got started. So I really wrote the book that I wish I had when I was getting started.
I absolutely love that because when I read your book, it felt like somebody had pulled the curtains across from where I was sitting in a room with the curtains closed. And I worked with a lot of businesses at this point, and I'd understood that the systems were really important. But what I didn't have was a thing I could go to. And as I was reading your book, and then I listened to it on audio, I felt like, this is exactly what we need in order to do what we know we need to do. And it's also such a great read. It's quite funny in places. It's really good fun, but it's so accessible. And that's what I love about it. I had it recommended to me and I've recommended it to many people. And we've been through the process several times. And it's been such a great journey because if you get stuck, you know exactly where to look and it's structured so easily. And I think that obviously that's how your mind works, that you've got a systems driven mind that would go from A to B. And what I've often noticed in businesses, they know that they want to change things and they try to do AC. This is where we are, this is
Yes.
where we need to be. But actually, you can't do that. And what comes out very clearly in your book is we start here, we document what's actually happening, and then look to trying to make that better. And I think the hardest thing when I'm coaching on this is to explain to people that you have to have that messy bit first, the hard, horrible bit at the beginning, where you do examine exactly what is happening in your business, and then you look to improving it. So would you mind just telling us in a nutshell, where is the best place to start with systemizing your business?
Yes, you've hit on a few real key points there around capturing what you're currently doing, not what you'd like to be doing. Because The reality is a lot of small business can get tremendous wins just by taking what they're currently doing and making it repeatable. A lot of small business just simply isn't repeatable in that it is very heavily key person dependent. And if the business owner isn't there, or maybe a key team member isn't there, then the business isn't able to deliver that task or that function. So with that in mind, just capturing what you're currently doing and making it repeatable, making that the baseline from which we work on, gets a huge win. To answer the question, where do you actually get started? What do you document first? I think, what is the business here to do? The business needs to deliver value to the client. We get rewarded for delivering value. So we focus first there. We think about, how does the business attract in new clients into their business? How do they handle those inquiries? How do they convert those inquiries into sales and close them and get them to purchase? How do they onboard that client into the business and deliver the product or service? And then how do we hand it back to them and make sure that the client's happy, and then they look to refer and repeat? It's that linear journey. I call it the critical client flow. And it's about first capturing and identifying that linear journey, just like you talked about with systemology, feeling like it was a system and an approach. That's just the way that I look at business as well. I think the business is here to deliver value. So what is the linear journey it has to go through to deliver that value? And if we can capture that and make that repeatable, you can go the step further, because sometimes what we went through there can uncover a whole handful of systems. The next question to ask sometimes is, where within that critical client flow is the pain? As in, where is something that you avoid or that you know is broken intuitively? Or if we got 10 clients tomorrow, this is the first thing that breaks. We can't handle the incoming inquiry. We can't handle the onboarding. And sometimes by using that method, you're able to narrow in further on really what is the biggest constraint for the business right now. And you go to work on that piece first by just capturing what you're doing.
It's interesting because quite often businesses go for coaching and they're urgent to grow sales. And actually, that can sometimes be the worst thing that happens. You can't grow a broken thing. And if there are these cracks inside the systems and processes, by having more customers only to disappoint them, then damages your reputation. So I think it's really important to capture what's actually happening and then making sure that is robust and that could experience growth. And so I really understand what you've just said there, opening a can of worms, when pulling the curtains out and having a look in. I remember once, a long time ago, back in 2012, I just started my first coaching business, and I went to buy a sign to stick on the side of my car as I was driving around. I thought, I could advertise on there. I went in to pick it up and pay, and the guy said, you can't pay because she's not here. The girl that does the invoicing is not here. I said, do I get it for free then? But it just illustrates that point. If the key person is not there, how can the business function? And I laughed to myself because I thought, I can't pay for it. I might as well have it for free. But it does illustrate that. So you identify this critical path of the flow for the customer, starting with the customer first. So we put the customer at the heart of the business. How do you manage that? Because obviously there's a lot of people involved. So in the book, you talk about the product champion, the champion of the systems. Can you tell me a bit about that?
The business owner, generally speaking, is busy and they're wearing many hats, and they recognize that systems are important, but there are a lot of other things that are more urgent or seemingly more urgent. So systems, very rarely for the small business owner, are high priority. And because there's an infinite number of things the business owner can be doing, it always just remains on the to-do list and it never gets done. And that's a big part of why the business owner gets trapped, and they need someone to really support them through this. The business owner still needs to lead this, but we have a role we call the systems champion. And the systems champion's role is to keep systems front and center, to continuously move this forward, to work with team members, knowledgeable workers who know how to do parts of the business, to capture what they're doing. Because not only is the business owner busy, depending on the size of the team, generally all of your best team members are busy as well. And trying to pull them away from their day-to-day tasks to try and get them to document process. Again, they have the same problem that the business owner has, which is, I'll put it on my to-do list, but they never get to it. So the systems champion is that real key linchpin to try and build up enough momentum and stick with this long enough. because that's the other thing. The efforts that you put into systemization, the payoff isn't immediate in that sometimes it takes time, and it's when you stack the little wins, you save a little bit of time there, you reduce some errors here, you start to get that compounding benefit that comes from systemization, and it might not get felt until 6, 9, 12 months down the track. And if a business owner just tries for a week or a month and goes, oh yes, we tried to systemize and it didn't really work for us, now we're just back to the way that things were, the systems champion becomes a way to overcome that, because it's part of their role, it's part of their responsibility. They help to build the systems culture. They talk about it on team meetings. They share it in your project management platform. They celebrate when someone creates or follows a system, and they start to plant some early evidence inside the organization that systems are important and this is how we do things here. So 98% of the successful businesses that we work with identify a systems champion. I think there's a very rare exception where the business owner really drives it forward, but generally speaking, they've got that systems champion role.
I can speak from experience there because I was coaching a customer new to systemology at the time, and I made myself that person within their business whilst I was coaching them. And I know the experience that they go through, and that really pushed their business forward once everything was settled in and embedded in. Now they've appointed somebody, and it's a constant focus for the business. Can we do this more effectively? And also, is everybody on board in terms of how we do things here? I really love that phrase. And I always like to think, a very famous quote, the system drives a business, but it's the people that drive the system. And it's about getting the people on board. And any system is only as good as the people that are using it. So therefore, you've got to have that culture where there's an appointed person who is responsible for the overall culture of driving this business through systems. And it does work. I've absolutely seen it. So I really am a big advocate. And the reason I really wanted to talk to you is because I see this very much in alignment with leadership. Because if we've got this system that drives the business, then trundling along in parallel is how do we build a culture in leadership to have the people driving the system? They've got to believe in it in order for it to work well. And I can imagine back in the day, in the 80s, we would have called people who liked to do things their own way, who were resistant to change and who didn't want to get on board with something new. We would have called them dinosaurs. This is how I do it. And some people have 25 years experience and some people have 1 year 25 times. Now, what we need in a systems culture is people who are prepared to grow, iterate, build, evolve, enhance, all of those things. Now, how do you see the role of a leader with getting people on board with this? What have you seen work in organisations that you know of?
I love the way that you're really involving the leadership team here. That was something Michael Gerber had said to me after I wrote the systemology book. He said, Dave, my only bit of advice for you on this book is don't let the business owner off the hook. You make the process sound like it's the systems champion's job and the business owner does nothing, when really the business owner first needs to fall in love with the idea and realize that this is the only way to build a profitable, scalable business that grows beyond them. So once they have that insight, then it makes it easier for them to lead it. They need to demonstrate by example. They need to put resources behind this. By hiring a systems champion, you're sending a clear message to the team that this is important. We value it. We're going to put time and resources behind it to make it happen. We're going to devote time on team meetings to talk about it. And the business owner, when they're working within the business, shouldn't operate above the law. Sometimes if they're off to the side and maybe they're working with their executive assistant, or they've got some dedicated team members that work off the side on new projects, they can operate in whatever method that they want. But when working within the business and engaging other team members, there needs to be following a certain structure. Which, again, I learnt that one from Michael Gerber, who many see as the godfather of small business systems, but he's a very creative mind. He's surrounded himself with systems-driven thinkers that have a process and that follow things. I found it enlightening and refreshing to know that that's not necessarily how he always operates. There's a level of, when he's working on projects, there's that disorganized, creative, let the brain run wild. And then depending on when he's engaging with the team, there's a different process on the way that things are handled. Just something to keep in mind, just because the business owner might not think that they are a systems person, that doesn't mean that they can't own a systems driven business. And quite often the founder is a creative visionary and it's not necessarily a strong suit for them. That's quite common. Ideally, when recruiting, you don't want too many visionaries in a business because there's too much dreaming and not enough doing. The business owner can be that way, but when it comes to the leadership team, you want to be finding organized, structured thinking project managers or department heads who can really champion this inside their teams as well. Having them be involved in systems creation and thinking and helping to teach team members that this is how you move up in the organization. The way you move up is to capture what you're doing, systemize it, and delegate it down to typically less skilled, lower cost team members to free up the higher skilled team members to work on the highest value tasks, which typically don't have process yet in place. Your best team members should be working on the tasks that don't yet have process because they need to make up the process and invent the process as they go.
I also hear you on that because I think the most important thing is a really excellent worker. When they're not there, does everything fall down? A bit like the lady with the invoicing and I couldn't pay for my sign. Building the mindset that the business is only robust when those key people are there. It's a bit like that famous story, and I can't remember who told it, where the orchestra was playing, the conductor was all well lit. It was in a theatre, very prestigious event. The lights went out. But actually, when the lights went out, the orchestra carried on playing because they'd got this well-rehearsed process for creating the sound. And they didn't need to see the conductor, even though he was pivotal. So they just carried on performing at their peak, even though the conductor wasn't visible. And I see that in a business, that you build the culture around valuing that when you're not there, how will this get done? It can't be reliant on me. And people who are new to leadership often think, I can give you the answer. In actual fact, a much better mark of how good you are as a leader is what happens when you aren't there. Can people function? It's about progression planning. It's about autonomy and giving people that expertise that they can step up. And I think systems leads nicely to developing people because you automate the things that are routine and you make everything exceptional that is not able to be systemized. So you've got your exceptional people and your robust systems, and building it into the way that people think takes great leadership. So you've got your great systems and you've got your great leaders. And I see that there's a perfect marriage there of how things get done. And also, ultimately, some people's end goal is to step away from their business, pass it on to a family member, or to sell it, or to copy it. And you can only do that and grow that way if it doesn't rely on you.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's 100%. And a lot of business owners, myself included, they're helpers and they love to get in there and solve people's problems. And sometimes that ends up holding them in the business and it ends up being a little bit of a trap because while that often helps them get the business off the ground and up and running because they're servicing clients and they've got a particular standard which they want to uphold and they hold their team to it. And when it's not upheld, they'll step in and do it. But the only issue is that ends up becoming the trap because you're forever stuck in it and you're training your team to come to you whenever they've got a problem and you'll be the knight in shining armor who solves it. And you train clients to come to you when they've got a problem and you end up being the center cog and bottleneck when really, as you rightly said, the key here is to train up team members that can problem solve themselves and they have a default way in which they solve a problem. They first go to where your systems and your processes are stored and they try and solve their own problem first. And they see, is it covered in the systems? Can I get the answer from there first? That's really what you want to train. And then beyond that, some critical thinking. As you said, with great team members, then it's okay, maybe we have a process for the way that we debug situations or when things don't follow the process exactly. Generally speaking, we say the system and the process doesn't capture every possible variation. Generally, it captures the most likely, the most probable. That's where you start first. And then exceptions are handled by the great team members. And then everything else gets handled by the junior team members when they can follow the process.
I think people sometimes like to feel a bit indispensable because they attach their worth to that. And I don't think that's a healthy culture. It's nice to have a helpful member of staff, but not to have a member of staff that thinks that everything must come to them. And it makes them feel a sense of self-importance that they'll come to me with their problems. As much as it's lovely to have helpful people, what we don't want is to build up a little empire where, oh, we can't do that because Brendan's not in today. It's not a healthy
Yes.
culture.
Rachel can't pay for her sign because Sally's not here. That's just not a way to grow a business.
I'm really drawn to this because I think I've got quite a systematic way of thinking. And then I think at the end of that, is that at the cost of creativity? And I think you covered that quite quietly, but I can hear in the back of my mind people saying, oh, systems stifle creativity. And what would you say to that?
I say that it releases creativity. You hinted at it a little bit earlier in the interview, but the whole idea is if we systemize the routine, things that must happen, there are certain parts of business that need to happen. You will need to generate leads. You will need to convert those leads. You will need to invoice and onboard and deliver. And there might be recruitment processes to hire new staff and get them into the system, management and finance. There are certain things in business that just need to happen. And they need to happen on a certain cadence. Every 2 weeks, you will have to pay your staff and it needs to happen in a particular way. Okay, so we have a process for the way that wages are done. Letting the systems take care of those scenarios ends up creating the space then for your team members to be creative when they need to be creative. Because to be creative, your brain needs room to move. And if it's caught up and thinking about all the little things that it needs to be on top of because the system's not handling it, it leaves no space for creativity. If we systemize the routine, that creates the space and then allows your best team members to do some of their best work.
That's been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time to come out to talk to me. I'm a huge fan, and I would urge anybody who's looking to grow their business to think about systems first. Always look to your system first and then the people. Can we correct the system? And from a leadership point of view, do your staff need to be developed? Thank you.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you.